I've decided to move on. I am grateful to CNN for the nearly 18 years.
Hey friends, Angela Parker, aka Boozy Bible Scholar, and I was sitting here and I was looking at Jim Acosta's final goodbye to CNN, and he said, "Don't give in to the lies and don't bow down to the dictators." And he talks about being the son of a Cuban immigrant, and me as daughter of formerly enslaved Africans. You have to realize my grandmother was a first generation out of slavery. My grandmother was a sharecropper in Jim Crow South Alabama. So her mother was a formerly enslaved person. So for me to make it to college, for me to make it into a master's program and into a PhD program is wonderful for our generation. But when I see this administration and what it's doing, it's heartbreaking because I know it's going to be difficult for my grandchildren and their children to achieve the same successes that I have achieved. And when I think about what is happening now and how we're going to have to keep fighting and clawing now. We're just going to have to keep doing that. It made me go back to my own work. If God still breathes, why can't I? Black Lives Matter and Biblical Authority. And I've been talking about my book, but I want to read a section, and this is what I want to do for a few minutes. The section is entitled Racial and Gender Dynamics in My Seminary Experience. Racial and Gender Dynamics in My Seminary Experience. And it's from the section entitled Stifled Breathing, Trained to be a White Male Biblical Scholar. Trained to be a white male biblical scholar. Oftentimes when we're in these conversations on DEI, you all think, not you all, but people think that diversity, equity, and inclusion means that someone got into a position that they did not deserve. And I would argue that we actually get into our positions and we deserve them more because we actually are tested more during our classroom experiences. So I'm going to read a section from my book. I'm not sure why I was so surprised by the magnitude of white people at my field's flagship conference. I experienced the same thing in many of my classes at Duke Divinity School. I lobbied twice to be allowed into classes taught by Drs. Joel Marcus and Richard Hayes, but was rebuffed twice because they were advanced classes, and apparently I was not advanced enough. I do not remember Dr. Marcus's class title, but the title of Dr. Hayes's class remains seared in my brain. Quote, "The Old Testament in the New Testament." Oh, how I wanted to take that class. I will never forget the time that I peeped in on the class proceedings one day, just to see who was in there. I was shocked to find that there were only white-looking folks in the class, and I often wondered what my black body would have felt and experienced if I had been permitted to join. I got to find out in different classes with these professors as I took, quote, Greek exegesis of the Gospel of Matthew with Dr. Marcus, and I took, quote, Greek exegesis of 1 Corinthians with Dr. Hayes in spring of 2010. In both of these classes, I was the only African American and the only woman. So you have to remember, I was the only African American person and the only woman in classes with about 20 other white guys. Why do I recall these experiences? Because they were the beginning of professors training me to read the Bible as a white male biblical scholar. Specifically, during a group discussion one day, someone mentioned feeding parishioners, and I wondered aloud what we as ministers receive from those whom we serve. I remember my colleagues, many of whom would go on in life to be productive and caring United Methodist pastors pushing back against me about receiving anything from parishioners. The mentality was that ministers do not receive from their congregants, nor from the poor folks in the neighborhoods to whom they may distribute canned goods. No, ministers give and receive nothing back from congregants and neighborhood members. I specifically remember thinking that I'm always ministered to when I least expect it, even as I am ministering. Most assuredly, I was reading Paul correctly, the Apostle Paul, when I remarked on mutuality in ministry, but I realized that my colleagues did not necessarily see the same ideas in Paul that I was seeing. Was it my race or was it my gender that made me ask these questions, that made me see differently in the 1 Corinthians text? And I continue to ponder these questions years later as I teach my own seminary classes. So why am I reading this tonight? I still bring these questions to my own seminary classes, to my own book work that I'm currently writing, that when I read Paul, my own race, my own gender still prompts the questions that I ask of the Apostle Paul. And I'm not reading as a white male biblical scholar. And as I reread what I've written in this book, and I see the administration of 45/47, these folks want everything for themselves. And they don't want poor people. They don't want disadvantage. They don't want anyone to have anything else. We are seeing immigrants being returned back to countries that they don't know. We are seeing people freaking out about SNAP benefits, and because of that outcry, you have to now hear about, no, we're not going to cut your SNAP benefits. But they didn't care. If there was no outcry, do you think that would have changed? They would not have cared. The cruelty is the point. And what I'm beginning to see is that there are some folks, as I reread this passage, who expect to have everything. And when they see fit, they will dole it out to other people when they see fit. And at one point, I was being trained to read and experience life as a white male biblical scholar, but that is not who I am. I am a womanist New Testament scholar and will continue to do that in this day and age. Angela Parker, aka Boozy Bible Scholar, as always, friends, reminding you to be bold, be brave, be brilliant.